Services and RSF 8. And you can see in the maps attached to your packet which areas are designated in excuse me, in each of those zones. And so staff and the Planning Commission is recommending approval. Planning Commission recommended 9-0 in favor of this request.
Okay. Okay. Any questions from staff on this? Yes, Sarah.
I've gotten a few concerned inquiries regarding the sensitive riparian areas on the site. Can you talk a little bit about what protections those areas would have if this were to go forward?
Sure. So essentially any zoning district would, you would have to look at the same thing. So it's generally at the development proposal that we would look at whether there's a streamside protection area, whether there are designated wetlands. It's my memory that there are actually some already designated core wetlands on this site, which they would have to, any developer would have to monitor, either stay out of or request to mitigate as part of the development plan. So that's really regardless of what zoning district is picked when the property comes under development. But it's something we're well aware of because it's upstream of Clabber Creek and the sensitive riparian area to the south.
Okay, so just to be clear that our streamside protection ordinance will protect the critical areas on this site.
If it applies. We just don't know if it applies currently without a development proposal and seeing what if there's actually a stream bank that drains at least 100 acres. We'd have to look at our maps to understand that. Okay. But if it does apply, then we would apply all of those protections to the development proposal.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, we'll take some public comment. Everybody gets one turn at the microphone. Introduce yourself and your address for the council. Keep your remarks to the chair, which would be me. And who would like to go first? Now, the only time you get to come back is if a council member brings you back up to ask questions, all right? Introduce.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to, my name is Joe Neal, and I live at 145 East Cleburne here in Fayetteville. And I've lived here since the 1960s. And I'd like to start out first by saying that I've probably come into this a little bit late with my comments, and I know that the city staff works way ahead on things like this, and if I was more diligent, I would probably know on the front end that there was maybe a better time to make the kind of comments I want to make here. But so I make an apology, and I don't fault anybody about this. Back in the 1950s, when Doug James first came to the University of Arkansas to teach, there used to be flights of thousands of American golden plovers through the area that includes this parcel of property. And there were many thousands of them. And these particular birds are among many North American birds that use grasslands in part of their lifestyle. And so at one time, Fayetteville was a very effective part of their range in migration. But we all know what's happened to that particular area, that it's been heavily developed by what's out there now, Landers and Sam's Club and lots of things. And American golden plovers are now really unusual birds anywhere in Fayetteville. When we see them, we get all excited. And I should also mention that I really appreciated the map that was on the city's website. The comments that I'm making here concern just part of the track that's being discussed tonight, and it's the part of there are several acres here, 33.38, that are up along Dean Solomon Road and 112, and it's more of an upland side. And my comments are about the 59.66 acres that are sort of across from the 112 drive-in. So just to orient you, that's the place that I'm talking about. That particular property, if you dig anywhere on that property, you dig a shallow trench, you're going to get the water. And people who are interested in wetlands recognize what are called hydric soils. That means that there is specific evidence that the ground is either flooded all the time, which we would all recognize as a wetland, or at least part of the time. So we refer to this as a seasonal wetland. And a lot of you probably remember more than 10 years ago when we got into a squabble about the property, which is part of Wilson Springs, now being managed as Wilson Springs Conservation Area. And the city at that time owned 289 acres in there that was going to be developed as a tech park, and that project fell through. And then the then mayor, Dan Cootie, appointed a committee of civic leaders and his political supporters, environmentalists. It was a pretty broad committee to study what the city should do with that property. And that committee came back not with a unanimous decision, but a near unanimous decision that the lower parts of that property should not be developed because they had wetland soils, and that what the city should do is protect that as a special area for plants and birds and so forth, butterflies and that sort of thing. For his own reasons, Mayor Cootie, who is a friend of mine, decided to ignore that recommendation and to go ahead and sell off a significant part of that property, and so it's now housing's being developed on it, much like I think will occur on this 59.66 acres. It'll be similar, I assume. Okay, my point in bringing this up is that I'm not familiar in this process if anybody's really looked at the seasonal wetlands issues here and what our role is in developing a city in which we really don't take those things into account that we see, except for an obvious creek with an obvious application of the streamside ordinance, that we're not taking into account the fact that we're dealing with wetland soils and wetland plants and wetland birds and all kinds of wetland ecological issues that are important that we consider. And what I've lived here way too long to think that this council, or excuse me, I don't mean to personalize it like that, that any city council in Fayetteville during my lifetime would tell somebody who wanted to develop those 60 acres, sorry, you can't put your houses on there. Because if it's legal and lawful, you don't have any grounds to stand on, and I understand that. But I do think that as we continue to lose and give up wetlands, that the role that the council can play here is to require that those losses be mitigated, that we take into account what's being lost when you authorize the development of that property, and that we take into account those losses and we try to make up for them somewhere else where it would be less of a burden on the property owners and where the public in general could gain something. So my point is that the people who are going to be the big losers are not even represented here. And I know that it's not your business on a day-to-day activity to go around and worry about fish and plants and birds and all that sort of thing, and I completely respect that. But as a biologist, I've devoted my life to it. And I've spent a lot of time in that area, starting most intensively with the Wilson Springs business. The people that won't be speaking here about this rezoning of this property and allowing it to be completely developed will be like the Arkansas darters that are in Wilson Springs and that need the flows from property like this 59 acres. Graham's crayfish snake. It hadn't been seen in northwest Arkansas in 50 years before it was found in very similar habitats like this out at the new wastewater treatment plant site, and is probably on this property as well. Osage's burrowing crayfish, I took one of the developers of that property and walked around that property with him several years ago for some other kind of a project that was planned there that I think fell through. And this is an endemic crayfish that occurs in 9 counties, and it's all over that property. Crayfish frog, another one that had not been documented in our area, and has now been found out there at Woolsey Wet Prairie. And it's similar habitat, it's close by, they're probably in this property we're talking about. Now, instead of going through all this, I know you didn't come here for a biology lesson, and hey, I don't blame you a bit for that because you got other stuff to do. But let me just read a short list. Smallmouth salamander, American golden plover, American bittern, least bittern, sorrel, brewer's sparrow, Henslow sparrow, cason sparrow, Bell's vireo, and plants like Indian grass and big bluestem. these are all creatures that we share this area with, and they're at risk with these kinds of developments. And my friend Aubrey Shepard here, who may try to get up and razzle you for a few minutes, you know, talked me into coming down here tonight, because I've given up on the thought that I'm not going to lay down in front of the bulldozers, and I'm not going to have a hissy fit in front of the council about the development of this property. But you could require some mitigation. And I don't have a good recommendation for that, because I'm not an expert and I'm not a lawyer. And I don't know how exactly that would work. But before you permit more of this kind of habitat to be developed in that area, you could require that those losses be mitigated, so that within the city of Fayetteville we would still have a lot of these creatures. But it's not going to happen if we just keep turning our backs on all of these other creatures that live here with us. And I think I'm done, unless you want to ask me something.
What questions do we have? Any? Thank you.
Well, thank you for giving me the chance.
All right. Come on up, Aubrey.
Very hard to follow Joe Neal, because he's still got a memory. He named the species and things that I can't always think of. But and what he said about mitigation is important. But one thing I'd like to encourage is that the city council engage in some change to ordinances that would require the planning department and engineering departments to go back to having a core of engineers' delineation of seasonal wetland. And that's sort of gone by the wayside for several years, and I'm afraid that partly there have been federal changes. They changed the rules, then they reinstated them. They're probably going to be weakened again. But the fact is that everything Joe's saying about it is important, and we can't replace that land. You know, we can't mitigate it in a full sense, and we won't have it, you know, in the city. And I would ask that there be some way that we not, you know, if you rezone it all to 8 houses per acre, there won't be any of those things on any of that land if it's required to go that way. If the best parts were protected, the ditches and actual still functioning streams, and take into account where the underground water is, where it's coming from, and where it's going from there before somebody develops it, and people can have a house that's adjacent to some beautiful grassland. They can have a house with a source of water that they can still pump out of the ground if they chose to, and knowing there's a well there and it's safe from pollution. But this is the Illinois River watershed, and it is something that our city's been sued over in the past, things that have polluted it, our city, our county, our state. And I hope that we'll get to care as much about it as we do Beaver Lake watershed, because we drink it. Thank you.
Thank you, Aubrey. Anyone else? I'm going to bring it back to the council. Yes, sir.
Has this been to the Environmental Action Committee, now that Alan's the chair?
It was not on the last agenda. It can be added to the next one.
I would like to see that done, and maybe if there's no rush on this, was this a staff-initiated rezoning? And, maybe it's something we could even go so far as to split off the 33.38-acre parcel and go ahead and rezone that, and then refer the balance of that in the critical areas to the Environmental Action Committee to just have them take a look at it.
Alan, that's your committee. Would you?
It will be next month before it meets again.
there's no rush on the rezoning of the property. That doesn't look, I mean, this is a staff-initiated rezoning. There's not a current development proposal. Now would be a good time to do it. And I would support going ahead and moving forward with the 33.38 acres to RSF 8. We could just split that off. That's not in the critical area. And then take a better, closer look to this, the other parcel on, I guess that's 112. That has the sensitive area running through it.
Okay. Yes, Jeff.
Jeremy, do we know if the current landowner has an opinion? Would he support this study? Would he support development? Would he support leaving it as it is?
I don't know. It's owned by a bank currently, so I'm not sure. We've notified them of what staff has presented. Rezonings don't go to Environmental Concerns Committee. It's just unless the council sends it there. It's not part of our normal process, but certainly we'll take any advice or thoughts that they have into consideration. So there's no imminent plans that we're aware of to sell the balance of this property or to develop it at this time.
Do you think the bank would support some move by the city council that may devalue their property or make it non-development property?
I don't think staff would support that. I can't, again, speak for the property owner. The request that we have before you is essentially to allow for the property to have some sort of marketability or developability within the city, whereas currently it has no development or zoning rights. And so what we have presented is simply a staff recommendation on the zoning, not necessarily the development. Development would have to be reviewed under all of our current ordinances, and Chris Brown, our city engineer, is here to he can discuss any wetland requirements. I'm not aware of any wetland changes that we've had in the last 5 to 10 years to not require certain standards to be met for Army Corps of Engineer mitigation, or particularly where there's delineated wetlands in place. In fact, the city has undergone a very extensive review of that very thing on Clapper Creek Trail for months and months, trying to place a boardwalk within a wetland area and having to do the same process. So we meet the same requirements as the developer would.
Thank you.
Okay. So,
Mayor, is it possible to break this off as Alderman Marsh has suggested? Can we, or maybe is that a question for the attorney?
Well, this was proposed by staff, and so staff, I think, would have the right, if they wanted to divide it into two separate, they've actually recommended two different zonings anyway. My only advice is that we need to zone it something in the near future. Now, there's not been any push by the bank, but I am uneased at the fact that we have land in the city where we have just not, at this point, since the PZD has expired, don't allow any kind of development on. I don't like to see that. We need to have some zoning on it in the near future that will allow at least some kind of development to go on at whatever zoning you believe is the most appropriate.
And from our perspective, it would be fine to split it off, or it would be fine to leave it all and go through at the same time. It really doesn't matter to us.
It seems there hasn't really been any objection to the 33.38 acres going to RSF 8. Seems like let's go ahead and get that done, and then we have the Environmental Action Committee, who's one of their objectives is to review land use decisions in environmentally sensitive areas, and it seems prudent to allow them the opportunity to review this issue and at least advise the council so that we can move forward with that information.
what's the council members think from the ward? That's y'all's ward over in there.
I haven't heard anything from several people who live in the area, and I didn't want it to move to the second reading at the last meeting because I usually do hear from those people in this area. So as far as constituent input, no, I haven't had any objections. But I'm happy to take it to the Environmental Action Committee at the next month's meeting. But again, if that poses a a problem with the delay. We could
Well,
have a-
staff initiated, so I don't think, I don't think it really makes a challenge, do you think?
I haven't heard from any of the constituents, but if I were a stockholder in that bank, I'd feel very imposed upon to have the city council come in and say, oh, this is wetland, you can't do anything with it. I mean, that takes away economic value. My basic conservative viewpoint is if the city wants to keep that as wetland, let them buy it from the bank and do with it as you please. But I think it'd be wrong for us to impose those standards on a private landowner, such as the bank. But I haven't heard from any of my constituents.
Okay.
Well, I would like to make a motion that we go ahead and split off the 33.3 acres and move forward with that rezoning.
Second.
With an RSF8.
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
You know, if I can, I just want to clarify, for Alderman Latour, what we're talking about isn't restricting the bank's rights, it's allowing them to do something. Because right now they can't build anything on it. So this discussion will actually put value in their property. I think we're all on the same page.
Okay.
To clarify.
So what we have before us right now is that 33.8 acres going to RSF.
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments on that? All right, any public comment on that section? Okay, going to bring it back to the council. We have a motion and a second to take 33.8 acres of the, whatever it is.
Is that an amendment? What we've already...
It would have to be an amendment to the ordinance.
Yeah.
I don't see all that, but you have that, you drafted this ordinance, Jeremy, so that's okay with you, you can handle that.
Correct. So the ordinance would be amended to remove the reference to the 59.66 acres. Community Services Exhibit A would also be amended to remove that, and Exhibit B, which is a legal description, they're already separated, so we simply remove the Community Services one.
Right, and then we'll just hold that for pending review by the Environmental Action Committee.
All right, everybody good? All right. Sandra, would you please call the roll?
Latour,
Yes.
Long,
Yes.
Gray. Yes. Marsh.
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Hetty,
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and now the 59 acres we will hold until the Environmental Action Committee can review it? Or what?
Actually, that's been amended out of the ordinance. The ordinance now only covers the 33.
Okay.
All right, so we can just...
All right, we're back to square one then. All right. So we're just going to leave it right here, right?
Or can we
We
go
can-
ahead and go to the second, or...
Well,
reading?
I think we're on the third reading of this
Okay.
particular,
It's been amended.
third reading.
yes.
So it's now been amended to rezone 33.38 acres to RSF8 residential single-family 8 units per acre, as shown on the exhibits that Jeremy will prepare and that you've seen, so you know what land we're talking about.
And then the 59 acres, we'll worry about the 59 acres later.
That's out of the ordinance.
Okey-doke.
So we'll have to create a new ordinance.
Just want to be sure I've got my head straight on this.
New ordinance, new notification.
So I'll be getting the calls tomorrow. All right. Anyhow, all right, everybody good? All right. Sandra, would you please call the roll?
Need a motion and a second to go to the third.
Okay.
So moved.
Okay, we need a motion.
Oh, we've got a third and final reading? Okay.
Well, I thought we were on third and final reading, but okay, all righty then.
We're on second reading, we need to go to the...
Okay.
Okay, there we go.
All right.
All right. Sandra, would you please call the roll?
Latour,
Yes.
Long,
Yes.
Gray. Yes. Marsh.
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Hetty,
Yes.
Tenet.
Yes.
All right.
Let's see if I can do it.
All right, here you go.
An ordinance rezoning that property described rezoning petition RZN 14-4883 for approximately 33.8 acres, located at Highway 112 north of Truckers Drive from RPZD 05-1796 Residential Plan Zoning District Park West to RSF 8 Residential Single Family 8 units per acre.
Okay. Everybody good? All right. Sandra, now would you please call the roll?
Latour,
Yes.
Long,